So you're looking to like really up your leadership game. And you've got Brene Brown's Dare to Lead in your stack of books to read.
Good choice.
It's a good one. This book is basically like a playbook for building trust and courage. And you know what the secret weapon Brown says we all need?
What's that?
Vulnerability.
Yeah, and it's not vulnerability like we typically think about it,
Well,
Like, Brown really flips the script and shows how vulnerability isn't about weakness. It's actually the bedrock of being a courageous leader.
okay, I'm listening. When I picture like vulnerability at work, it's usually not a pretty picture. It's more like someone spilling coffee on themselves in a big meeting, not exactly leading with courage. So how does Brown want us to see it differently?
It's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it this way, like a tightrope walker, way up high. They don't just walk out there with no safety net, right?
Right.
That net lets them take risks to be daring. That's what vulnerability does for leadership. It's the safety net that makes risk-taking possible, sparks creativity, and paves the way for real innovation.
Okay, so how do we actually like weave this vulnerability as a safety net idea into how we lead? That's not usually something we're talking about in like leadership training.
Right. You start by modeling it. Think about simple but powerful actions. Admitting when you don't have all the answers, actually seeking out feedback instead of getting defensive. These small things can create a sense of psychological safety, which is like oxygen for a team that wants to perform at a high level.
Right, and that psychological safety helps to build trust, which seems to be a common thread through a lot of leadership advice these days. But then you've got all these buzzwords like empathy and connection thrown around so much that they lose all meaning.
And Brown gets that. She goes deeper than just like throwing around buzzwords. For her, empathy isn't just about feeling for someone. It's about taking action, actively listening, truly valuing different perspectives, and creating a space where everyone feels heard.
I love that she emphasizes creating that space where people feel safe to be authentic. It makes me think about this one time when I had a leader who really listened to what I had to say, and it like instantly built trust and made me way more willing to speak up and contribute.
Exactly. Fostering that sense of belonging and shared purpose,
Yeah.
that's what makes a team click, and ultimately it translates into real results.
So we've established that trust is vital, but actually building it can feel kind of nebulous. But luckily, Brown gives us this fantastic framework, this acronym that's super easy to remember: BRAVING.
I love a good acronym.
Right.
And what's so great about braving is that it takes this big, sometimes overwhelming concept of trust and distills it into 7 very tangible elements.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's hear them.
Boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, which refers to confidentiality, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity.
Okay, so it's not about these big sweeping gestures, but about consistent everyday actions. It's about walking the walk, right?
Exactly. It's like making regular deposits into a trust bank. Small, consistent actions build a solid foundation. One slip-up might not break that trust, but if slip-ups become the norm, that foundation starts to crumble.
That's such a good way to think about it. If you had to pick just one element of braving that really resonates with you, which would it be?
For me, it's vault.
Yeah.
That sense of confidentiality.
Right.
Knowing that what's shared in confidence is going to stay confidential is huge for building trust and for having those like really open and honest conversations.
Because it's like you're creating that safe space, right?
Yeah.
Like a vault where you can actually be vulnerable.
Exactly. And when you have that foundation of trust, you can navigate the tough stuff so much more easily. Like you can actually lean into those values that are guiding your actions as a leader.
Because it's about consistency, right? But what fuels that consistency is knowing what your core values are. And Brown seems to be a big believer in not just talking the talk, but walking the walk when it comes to values.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about identifying those non-negotiables,
Yeah.
those core values that act as your compass, especially when you're facing a really tough decision to make. And here's where it gets really interesting. Brown suggests narrowing it down to your top 2 core values.
Only 2.
Yeah, not 5, not 10, just 2.
I feel like most leadership books want you to sit down and come up with like pages of values.
Right.
So why just 2?
Because when you're in the heat of the moment, you know. And you've got to make a challenging decision. You don't have time to be weighing 10 different values.
Right.
But if you've got those 2 core values, those non-negotiables, it just cuts through all the noise and gives you clarity.
Yeah, it's like having that cheat sheet for those make or break leadership moments. Speaking of tough calls, though, like Brown doesn't shy away from the tough stuff, like failure, for instance. She seems to really embrace it.
She does. And this is where that whole rumbling with vulnerability concept comes in.
Okay.
It's about leaning into those uncomfortable things, those difficult conversations, those messy emotions, and, yeah, even our failures, instead of just trying to avoid them.
Which is hard, right? Like
Yeah.
our instinct is to dodge discomfort.
Totes.
We want to like hide our failures, not examine them.
Yeah, but Brown argues that the real growth happens in those moments of rumbling. Think
Yeah.
about it like learning to ride a bike. You're going to fall down. You might even skin your knees a few times.
Right.
But every time you pick yourself back up, you learn something new and you build resilience.
And there's that word again, resilience. It keeps coming up, and for good reason. It feels like it's a really essential skill for leaders to have, especially in today's world.
It is. Think about it. Constant change, uncertainty, the pressure to perform. Leaders who can bounce back from setbacks, who
Mm.
can model that resilience for their team, they've got a superpower.
So, how do we tap into that superpower? How do we cultivate more resilience, both for ourselves and for our teams?
Well, Brown gives us some really solid strategies in Dare to Lead. She talks about self-awareness, really understanding your own emotions and what triggers you. She talks about self-compassion, which is crucial, especially when we're struggling. And of course, she emphasizes seeking support when you need it.
Yeah, because asking for help isn't weak, it's actually a sign of strength.
Exactly. And that all circles back to vulnerability, doesn't it?
Hmm.
Being willing to show up authentically, even when things are hard. Because resilient leaders don't just bounce back, they rise strong.
Rise strong. I love that. It feels so much more empowering than just bouncing back. And it speaks to the growth that comes from actually navigating those challenges.
It does.
Right.
And it's not about pretending those setbacks don't sting. It's about acknowledging them, learning from them, and coming out on the other side even stronger, even braver.
It's like they always say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But in this case, it's about like becoming a more resilient
Yeah.
leader, right?
Yeah. And isn't that what we're really talking about? Like this whole journey of leadership. It's not about being perfect. It's about embracing the messiness, learning from your experiences, and always striving to show up as your best self.
You've given us a lot to think about today. As we start to wrap up our deep dive into Dare to Lead, what's like the one big thing you hope our listener walks away with?
Um, if you only remember one thing from what we talked about today, let it be this. Vulnerability isn't the opposite of courage. It's the pathway to it. When you choose to show up authentically, embrace imperfection, and dare to be brave, even when it's tough, that's when you can really unlock your most courageous leadership.
Yeah, that's so powerful. It's about leading with heart, with that willingness to be brave and connect on a human level. That's how you build trust and inspire the people you're leading. And ultimately, it's how we achieve those extraordinary things together.
I couldn't agree more.
So, for everyone listening, here's a final thought to ponder as you embark on your own Dare to Lead journey. If vulnerability is the key that unlocks courageous leadership, what's one small, bravey step you can take today to embrace vulnerability in your own leadership? Think about it for a second. Maybe even like jot it down somewhere. But most importantly, go out there and do it because courage is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. Until next time, keep daring to lead.